Managing multiple lookup values from a single view. You know what? I've decided rather than confuse people, I've confused you enough. So I don't want to do the alternate method and then the preferred method. I'm going to leave the code here for the alternate method. Basically, you just have basically a list box for each and every one. You can see them all on the screen at once. Play with it if you want to, but I'm going to jump right to the preferred method because I really think it's much improved. It's much better because instead of getting all the data, for all the lookups and bringing all that data into the view every time you want to show the index, what we do is we just go and load the data that's requested at the time. So much more efficient, as well as it makes a very nice presentation of the information. So we're just going to follow along in this approach to this business of handling multiple lookups, right? So we're just going to get the data we need, and we're going to put it in a Bootstrap tab, right? So we won't actually ever show the separate index view for each lookup, okay? Instead, we're going to make miniature versions of each one in a partial view. And then we're going to use select lists instead of tables to show it because it's just one piece of information. That's what a lookup is, right? We're also going to have a comment. Now, mind you, if you really do have just two pieces, as long as you have a summary property where you can show it in a single piece of information, that works as well, by the way. Okay, and we're going to have our new common lookups controller with an index view that will load the partial views when requested. How will it do it? Well, basically, we're going to use Bootstrap tabs, right? So just a note here, we will continue to use the actual create, edit, and delete actions and views for each lookup entity separately. So we'll still actually have to have those in the system because that's what looks after actually doing the work for us, right, of maintaining this information. But the lookup index, okay, we'll use a Bootstrap tab. So you can just click the tab for each of the different lookup entities, okay, and then it will load that partial view dynamically as we select the tab. So that way we aren't loading all the data at once, just whichever ones they select. And the final trick is we're going to figure out a way to actually have it select the correct tab for us when we navigate back to this index, right? Okay, so that's in a nutshell all that we're going to do. Sounds like a lot, but you're going to see it's actually not all that bad. So we're going to use our medical office example here. So right now we have 4 different things which I would classify as lookup values: conditions, medical trials, appointment reasons, and specialties. They're all, notice they're foreign keys of either doctor or patient, right? And they're things that normally often will appear in a drop-down list or a select control, okay? So we're going to actually have to make these eventually. So that's what I'm going to do next. Let me just actually come back here to Visual Studio. And I'm just going to, before we go on, come up to controllers. We're going to actually have to build each and every one of these. Now, this is a little tedious and repetitive, so I won't make you watch me do all of them. But let's start off just to remind ourselves. I like to have everything checked here. And then I could start with, I don't know, appointment reason. Now, here's a key point. Remember, we're doing this from now on. Our controller name should not be pluralized like the default it wants to do here. It should just be appointment reason. Of course, good thing we now have our camel case business, so it'll separate those words. But anyway, just let me click add, right? And this will scaffold the controller and all the views. Beautiful, just exactly what we need, right? Okay, so as I said, it takes a moment or two. I won't make me watch you do each and every one, but I just want to kind of go through it to remind you of this process. Let me do one more, at least I'll get it started. New controller with the views using entity framework. Pick a different one. How about condition? These are all the medical conditions. So remember, take out the S. And there we go. All right, well, I'll pause the video while I get the others in place. Okay, so I've just finished creating them all. And actually, on purpose, I made a mistake. Notice when I did the medical trials, I forgot to remove the S. Okay, so it's not singular. Well, I did that so I could show you how to fix it. So, yeah, you could just delete it and recreate it again, but it's really not a big deal. I can easily fix it, but I wanted to make sure I do it before I forget. So if I just right click the actual class file, right, come down to rename, and I can take that S out, okay, or whatever the pluralization was that was added. When I press enter, I'll get prompted, wait a second, you're renaming a file. Do you want to perform a rename on the objects? I'll say yes. And notice that it actually then fixed here, okay, the name of the class and even in the constructor, right? Almost finished. In fact, that's as easy as that. But down in views where it created the folder for all the views for medical trials, right? See, it has the S there. So I have to rename this folder as well so it matches the name of the corresponding controller. And that's it. That's how you have to fix it. If you accidentally forget to remove that pluralization, okay, it would work well as well for specialties, right? I could just put it back to TY instead of IES and so on. Okay, so now I have them all here. Now, before I go further, I want to mention a couple things. We're going to keep the index action, but you know what? We'll never use details. I mean, gosh, you have usually one piece of information. So we'll never actually use details. So if you want to, it's entirely up to you. You could actually delete it out of each and every one of these, right? Feel free, okay? And along with that, coming down to the views. So right now I'm working in condition. So let me come to the condition views. Now, it's not necessary to remove this, but we'll never use details, so I'll delete it. And you know what? I'm never, ever actually going to go to the index either. I can delete that because we'll always redirect back to our new lookup index. Okay, so in each and every one of these, I can delete index, I can delete details. You don't have to, but you know, why have files there that you're never going to use, right? Same with medical trial and details. Right? Now we do still need the create, delete, and edit because we're going to be using them to actually do that work, right? So details. Of course, I could select more than one at a time to delete too, but anyway. All right, there we go. So remember, of course, in the controllers themselves, right? I can delete details. Don't delete index though. And I'll explain again why in just a moment. But basically, it's going to be like our life raft that if for some reason, somehow we miss something in our code somewhere and we accidentally send you to index, we're going to put code in here that redirects you properly to the actual common lookup index that shows all the lookup values on it. So don't delete the index action. Okay, in fact, you should always leave an index action because it's the default action for any controller. I can feel free to delete the details though, and that's just fine, right? And finally, appointment reasons, I'll just delete the details just so I'm being consistent. I didn't need to make you watch me do all that. Speaking of not watching me, what's another important thing that you should always do in these new controllers? Of course, you know the answer, right? Right now, the way they're scaffolded by default, in the post where the actual changes to the database are saved, this should always be in a try catch, right? So yeah, I'm not going to do it now. We've gone over it many times before. I'm not going to make you watch me do that, but in all four of these controllers, make sure you go into the post event for create, edit, and delete. Do our try catch, okay, with our proper catches for the different errors that might be generated by the database, and even the edit, okay, make sure you switch it. So instead of doing a standard edit with the whitelist, make sure you're using try update model, right? Very important to do all that work, but I'm not going to take time to make you watch me do it right now. So you just make sure that that is all done. All right, so I'm going to leave that alone for now. Just clean up some of this other stuff and let's get back to the lesson. Okay, so now in the copy paste file, after we get all that in place, as it says here, we're going to make a new empty lookup controller, right? Now this is not lookups, there's no S there, right? This is the one and only lookup controller where all of our lookups are going to come to the party and be available from the one index view, right? Okay, so to do that, I'll come up to controllers once again, right? Right click, say we're going to add a controller. But this time, I'm just going to select an empty controller because I don't need any of this stuff scaffolded, right? So I'll just say an empty controller because all we really have to do then, I'll give it a name, lookup controller. Notice there's no S, right? Lookup controller. And we do want to do two things, okay? I want it to be a cognizant controller, right? It needs to be self-aware. And we need the DB context, okay? So I will add our usual private read only, okay, medical office context, and we'll add the actual constructor here so that we can inject it from our dependency injection system, right? Those services in our program.cs file. Okay, now for the index, we'll come back and play with this index in a few minutes. But what we're going to do is we're going to add partial view results to the controller. Yes, we actually have a new type of result. We've seen action results before, right? And we even did file content results when we did oh, no, I guess we haven't done that yet. Sorry. Getting ahead of myself. It's so hard not to do that when you're excited about this stuff, right? Okay, so after the index, I'm going to put in 4 partial view results. So these are results that you can come and ask as an action of the controller to say, give me this partial view, right? So each and every one of these returns a partial view. Okay, notice that for condition, it's underscore condition. So we'll go and we'll make these in a minute, right? But for each one, none of them will actually have a model, but we're putting the data for the select inside of the view data. So condition ID, specialty ID, appointment reason ID, medical trial ID. Very much like we've done select lists before, right? Now the point is that we aren't pulling them all in at once. We're only going to select one of these at a time. So if we never ever need to look at specialties, then we'll never execute this query. We'll never go and pull all the specialty names out of the database, right? We're minimizing the amount of data we're pulling from the database and sending down to the client by only getting what is actually requested, by putting it in separate partial views. Okay, all right. Now, we're going to actually have to make these partial views. So where do they go? Well, let me mention this, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to make a folder for our lookup controller, right? Just like we have for our other controllers. Now, we didn't make one initially because we said empty, okay? But I can right click on index, good thing I didn't delete it, and say add view. It'll be a razor view, okay? And I just want to make sure it's not as a partial view, right? We're going to use the layout page. It'll be called index, but it can be empty. We don't need a model, right? For this particular index, because all the data actually will be coming in these partial views. So it's just going to make the folder under views for lookup, right? And it will create my empty index view. And there it is. So you can see that down here under views, we've added lookup, right? It just has our index and there's basically nothing in it, okay? So my question was a moment ago, inside our lookup controller, we have all these partial view result actions, right? They each return a partial view. So we actually have to create these partial views themselves. Normally, up till now, most of our partial views we've created here in the shared folder because we might call upon them from multiple different controllers. This situation is different. We'll only ever need these partial views from the lookup controller. So it makes sense not to clutter up the shared folder with ones that will only ever be used from lookup, right? So here is where we're going to actually create these partial views. Now the code is in place here, right? So I can just get this and get it in place. Let you watch me do the first 1 or 2. So I'm going to add a view in lookup, right? Select a razor view. Now this time I do check off as a partial view, underscore appointment reason, click add. Just take a moment or two here. Okay, I'll replace these comments with the code from my copy paste file. So what is going on inside this partial view? Now the others are going to be identical, obviously just focus on different entities, okay? So I'm just using a card here, a Bootstrap card, just to make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more professional. Remember, a card has a header, a body, and a footer, right? So in the header, we're going to show a nice big name here, appointment reasons, okay? And we have an ID for the header as well, because believe it or not, later on, we're going to pull the HTML content of this H4 tag out and use it in a message to the user, right? To say you haven't selected any of the appointment reasons, basically, at some point in time. So that's why we have an ID on the H4 itself, okay? Then in the body, we have a drop-down list, just like we've done when we supply a select list in our filter sections at the top before. But notice this, we're passing an additional HTML attribute, size equals 6, right? So a drop-down list can look just like a multi-select list box. But since it's still a drop-down list, we can only ever select one item, which is what we want. We wouldn't want to be able to select multiple items. We can only pick one at a time. But by setting a size greater than 1, it looks like a list instead of a drop-down, right? So that's basically how we present the data that will be supplied from our code when we build the select list for appointment reason ID, right? Then in the card footer, we have our links. Now the create link is fine, okay? It just, the controller is appointment reason, okay? The one that we created a few minutes ago. Action is create, because that's it. You don't need to have any additional parameters or anything else. You just call the create action of your appointment reason controller in this case. However, edit and delete are a little different, right? Because we do have to supply the ID of, right, as a route parameter, the ID of the particular entity that we want to either edit or delete, okay? So that's why we have here a class link click, because in client-side JavaScript, we're actually grabbing the click event of this link, okay? And we'll identify it by it having this class link click, right? So we can grab it, we can prevent the default action of following the link and take over in code and do what we want to do instead. Okay, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to repeat this for the other three. So I'll right click. We'll add another one, another view. It will be our medical trial. Don't forget the underscore at the beginning of the name. So a razor view, underscore medical trial. Make sure it's set as a partial view, empty, without model. Click add. And basically the identical code comes in here, of course, just focused on the different entity, the medical trial. There we go, right? So again, I have a H4 in the card header. Its ID is medical trial. And then here's a nice user-friendly HTML text inside the H4 tag that we use later on. Our drop-down list for medical trials, again, size is 6. And then our footer has our, again, our edit and delete have this class link click, right? So I'll make the other two. I won't make you watch me do all of them. Okay, so just finished adding the other ones. We have specialty, underscore condition, underscore medical trial, appointment reason, right? All four of them are there. And they all, of course, work along here with the partial view result actions in the actual lookup controller, right? So when we call for one of these actions, it will prepare the data, the select list, and then return the partial view, and the view data will be available to actually create, for example, in appointment reason here, right? The actual drop-down list, size equals 6, and so on. Okay, so let's go back to the actual index view now, right? So here is where we want to show, make all this information available, but we're going to be smart about how we do it in that we want to use Bootstrap tabs, right? So if you go back to Blackboard for a second, right? Notice that in here, I make mention, here's some technique, you know, click these links, read all about Bootstrap tabs, okay? How nabs and tabs work and so on, and how we can work with the different tabs. And you can set them up with pills. So if you don't like the look of a tab, they look like buttons. You can even do them vertically and horizontally. Lots of flexibility there. And of course, we're also using Bootstrap cards, which we've looked at before, because we use the card with its header, body, and footer, and so on, back when we did our modal pop-up for changing page size, right? Just want to remind you that you do have all these resources available to explore these technologies even further, right? Okay, but here on our actual index page, let me just get the code and we'll have a look at it here. Actually, I'm gonna get it without the script first of all. All right, so what do we have? Not a lot. So it just says lookup values. Notice there's no model, so we don't need anything up there. And then inside this div, we have nav tabs, right? So we have nav tabs, and each one, notice we're making the first one active, so that by default will be the one selected when the page first loads. Each has an ID, and the ID matches, okay, basically the name of the entity, specialty, medical trial, condition, appointment reason, dash tab, right? Now we have a Bootstrap toggle that it's a tab, right? And then the target, notice the pound sign indicates an ID, specialty panel, panel, condition panel, etc. Right? All right, so each one is set up as a button, the role is tab, and so on and so forth. And the area stuff is just for screen readers and things like that. We actually show the words here: specialties, medical trials, conditions, and appointment reasons. So basically that gives us the tabs across the top. And as you click one, this is all just built into how the Bootstrap tab control works. We come down here to tab content, right? And then each is a tab pane, okay? And the ID, specialty panel, medical trial panel, notice they match the targets of the different tabs, the nav tabs up top. Condition panel, well, that's the ID of this particular tab panel, right? And so on and so forth. So this is just getting it all set up. Now, I threw some numbers in here. I'll take them out later on, but just until things are working, we just want to actually see something on the tab, right? So that's why I threw those numbers in there right now. So this should actually function if we actually run it right now. Well, maybe before I do, let me actually come down to our shared, our layout page. So I can just add, right, a new link here for our lookup. Okay, so the controller is lookup, action is index, and I'll say something like maintain lookup values. Okay. Okay, so if I come here, you can see the tabs, and as I click on the tabs at the top, we're changing the panel, tab panel, down below, right? So we can see that it's actually happening. Now, nothing's happening in terms of the partial views yet. That's going to come in a minute or two. So we need to add some JavaScript code. Now it looks like a fair bit at first, but it's broken down into some separate bits of functionality here, right? So bear with me. Now we have added code to pages before. Remember how this works, okay? All we have to do is put it in a section called scripts, because remember back here on the layout page where we were just working, oh, I put in the wrong page. There you go. Render section scripts, right? I meant to do it here. Sorry about that. There we go. Because back here on the layout page, here's where we say render section if there's a section named scripts, then it gets inserted into the page right at that point in time. Okay, let me just get that off the screen so I don't get mixed up. Okay, so basically, remember I mentioned that each of our tabs, okay, has an ID, right? Specialty tab and so on. So we're going to be able to navigate back to those tabs using this code. But first of all, let's just look at the nav links themselves. Okay, they have a click event, right? So as we click each of these nav links, okay, and we respond to its click event, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to grab the ID of the one that was clicked, and that's our active tab. And then we're going to call refresh tab on the active tab. So in other words, if I click the nav link up here for the condition panel, okay, the ID is condition tab, right? That's the active tab then that I get here. That's the ID. So then I call refresh tab with the active tabs. That comes up here to this function called refresh tab. I pass in the active tabs. That's going to be one of these values: specialty tab, medical trial tab, condition tab, appointment reason tab, right? So as I activate that tab, basically, right, what do? I call, okay, here the pound sign is the ID of specialty panel, medical trial panel, etc., right? So these are the actual tab panes down here. Okay, you can see the IDs right there. So I go to the tab pane, okay, and I can use this nice little jQuery function called .load. And all I do is I pass the URL parameters that I need, or the URL values, okay, slash lookup, that's the controller, slash specialty, okay, that's the partial view result. So that will go and get that partial view for specialties, load it into the specialty panel. Same thing down here for the medical trial panel, and so on. So that's how we actually load as we click each of the links at the top for the different nav links. That's how we load those partial views into the panels themselves. And that all happens just by grabbing the click event of the nav links themselves. Now, that's okay. We can actually see how that happens. I guess I can run it again, and we'll just see that bit of functionality going on. So coming here now, if I click it, right, you see it didn't click at first, so that's why I didn't go and get it. But so see, if I never need to worry about appointment reasons, I never pull that data from the database. I don't bring it down here, right? But if I do decide I need to work with that, I click it and it goes and gets the data, gets the partial view, and loads it in, right? So that's a very nice, slick way to do it, okay? And that's all happening from that little bit of JavaScript using that jQuery.load to load the HTML that's being returned, this partial view, into the actual tab panel. All right. Now, these links, okay, the create link should work, okay, because it will just go to the specialty/create, and there we are, right? Now, back to list isn't going to work yet because it'll go back to the specialties index. I'll just use the back button for the moment. But notice that once again, I have no data until I actually select something. So we're going to deal with that in a moment too as well, right? Okay, let me stop running. So we've looked at this bit of JavaScript and we understand what it does now. This, as we click each nav link at the top, it calls refresh on whichever tab panel, okay, was the one that corresponds to the nav link that was clicked. All right. Maybe we'll talk about this next, okay? If in the view data we pass the name of a tab, we're going to trigger the click event of that particular tab, right? So that will happen when we actually get that into place. So let's just come back to the lookup index for a moment, right? We haven't I said we'd come back and we'd play with the actual index action, right? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to add a parameter here, right? So optionally, we can pass in a parameter. The name will be tab. It'll be a string. And then I'm going to set a default as my first one, my specialty tab, right? So when I first come to the lookup controller, I'm going to assume if I don't have a different value passed for this string variable called tab, that it will be specialty tab. Then I throw that into view data, whatever the value is, if it's still specialty tab or if I've passed, condition tab, whatever, right? That'll be put into view data here as tab, right? And then I just call return view. So this is how we can actually select on the client, right? Using JavaScript, a given tab. How does that work? Come back down here, look at this last little function. After a little bit of a timeout, okay, 10 milliseconds, basically, right? After that time, we're going to trigger the click event on whichever one we want. Notice the pound sign means it's an ID, right? So if it was specialty tab, right, then that's the one that we clicked, okay? So that essentially gives us our click event here for the appropriate tab, right? So now that I have that in place, next time I run, when I select maintain lookup values, now for a moment there, for a brief moment, you might have seen the 1, right? But very, very quickly, it on the client side triggered the event of clicking specialties and it went and loaded the partial view into place, right? So now I can get rid of that 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because I should never see it now. Now it will always, as long as I pass the appropriate value here, right, for whatever tab I want to have displayed, then it will automatically go to that. Okay, it just is defaulting to the first one, our specialties tab. Okay, so we're making progress. So maybe I'll do that before I forget. So let's come back here to the actual index view up here. Remember I put those numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 in here, right? I can take those out. I can just have it empty. I just wanted to have them there so I could illustrate how this functions, right? But I don't need them now that we're going to always make sure that we actually select a tab, defaulting to the first one, our specialty panel, all right, if nothing else. Okay, so we've talked about all this JavaScript, including the little function at the bottom. The only thing left is what's going on here. JavaScript we have left to explore is this chunk right here. Now, to do this, it's actually easier to do it right in the actual browser to explain, and we can step through in debug mode. So let me run this again. And if I hit F12 on the keyboard, right, that brings up all the tools that the browser can provide. So let me come here to maintain lookup values, right? So we can see the code is right here. Let me just remove that. So as I switch, okay, don't see much changing there because it's just dynamically loading this information in, right? Okay, but well, I'll pick one. I'll pick medical trials, for example. So if I were to click edit right now, I don't have anything selected. But if I set a breakpoint here in the JavaScript, okay, right on prevent default, then as I click, okay, because this has the class link click, it should trigger this event. Let's see if it does. Yes, it did. Okay, so we stopped here, okay, and we're going to first of all execute prevent default so it will prevent it from actually navigating off according to the link, right? So stepping through the code, first thing we're going to go, this is, of course, the link we just clicked on. Attribute is the href of it. So we'll grab that as our address, right? So there it is, slash medical trial slash edit. So that's the actual address of the link that we clicked on, okay? So we're splitting it to just get the actual name of the controller, basically, right? So that's our lookup. Okay, lookup is medical trial, which gives us the name of the entity or the controller, technically speaking, in this case. Now, we're going to use that in the next line of code because that's also the name. If we put an ID at the end, that's the name of our select control, right? That's set here with a size of 6. Okay, the pound sign means ID. The lookup with the letters ID at the end, that's the select control. So we're going to go to that and get dot value. So the value of the selected item in the select control. Well, it's null because we didn't have anything selected. Big deal. Okay. So now we're going to get the caption. Well, the caption comes from when we actually built these uh, partial views. Remember, I mentioned this in the header of the card here. This is the actual text. It's the inner HTML of the H4 tag at the top. The H4 tag, we gave it an ID of the name of the lookup, okay, medical trial, for example. So the .html will be whatever HTML is inside here, right? So that's the next thing we pull out, okay? So the caption is medical trials because that's what's shown here in the header. Now, of course, the ID is null, right? So we'll come in here, we'll bring up our alert. No value selected from the, using the caption, medical trials list. Thank you. Okay, that reminded me that I need to do that. So I'm just going to click the run button to run right through. This time I'll select one of them. I'll click edit, or I can do delete. It doesn't matter which one, okay? I'll select delete. So once more, we're paused on prevent default. Step over that. Okay, get our address is, of course, medical trial slash delete. So the lookup or the name of the actual entity is medical trial, right? And so caption, okay, is medical trials again. I could have picked a different one, but that's okay. Now the ID this time, remember, we actually have a value here, 5, because we did have something selected. So it went to the pound sign, lookup, ID, in other words, pound sign medical trial, that ID, that's the ID of our actual select control. It grabbed the value, which is the primary key of tuck hair loss treatment, right? Okay, so we have our value. That's what the last thing we needed in order to properly select this record for either edit or delete, in this case, delete, right? So I don't jump in there. Now I come to the else branch, and all we actually have to do, remember we prevented the default of navigating according to the link that was clicked. So to actually do that in code, we just go window.location and give it a href, right? That href will be the address, which is slash medical trials slash delete. We add another slash and we provide the ID of 5. And that's it. Perfect. That's exactly what we want to do. And we'll come over here. Are you sure you want to delete this medical trial, right? And there it is, our hair loss treatment. So trouble is, if I delete it, I won't bother. It would actually delete it, I think, as long as, well, no, it might not, because there could be people using it, right, who are in that trial. So that would prevent us because of referential integrity. But I just want to show you, if I click back to list right now, it's not set up yet to do anything but try to go back to the index of this controller, which the index action's there, but of course we've deleted the view, right? So that's why we're going to get that message. But the real point of the exercise was to walk through this JavaScript and explain what it's actually doing, right? So it's taking over from our partial views here, allowing us to click these links, go to the drop-down list, our select control with that ID, get the value of the currently selected one, and add it to the end of the link. Whew, boy, that JavaScript is doing an awful lot for us, but isn't it nice? Okay, so all of these things are being taken care of. All right, so there's a little bit more work for us to do, though, in terms of how we navigate back to the lookups controller and so on. But first of all, let me just deal with the actual, uh, um, sorry, index action here. Okay, so that's taken care of already. So we just want to focus on the controllers now for the actual lookup entities. So I'm going to close all this stuff. This is all working the way we want it to, right? So now we have our specialty controller, medical trial controller, condition, and appointment, right? So these are all the ones where we took out the details action, right? We left the index action, but it doesn't actually work because there is no view anymore. So for each one of these, remember earlier on, we added a new custom controller, our lookups controller, right? So basically, we want to make each one of these lookup controllers, we want it to inherit from there, okay? So each one of these, I'm going to inherit from lookups controller, appointment, condition, medical trial, and specialty. I could have tried to do a fancy search and replace, but I think this was safer. And there's only 4 of them, so it wasn't a big deal. So now they all have smarts about what all the cognizant controller is inherited, as well as it's ready to generate our return URL, right? Okay, so that's good. Now, in each one of them, okay, we've done that inheritance. Now the index action, what we want to do is we want to give a return, a redirect using our return URL, right? Now, the only thing that's tricky here is that right now these are set up for asynchronous operation because it expects to query the database, and that's always best to do asynchronously. We're not going to be querying the database, so basically I want to remove this async business, take out the task. It's going to be a plain vanilla iAction result, right? Because we aren't going to be doing that anyway. What we're going to do is same redirect we used earlier with our sort, filter, and paste business. We're just going to return to our return URL, redirect to the return URL, right? So that's perfect. So we're going to put that in place, okay, for each and every one of the controllers for the index action. Probably could almost do a search and replace for this, but sometimes I like to do things manually as well. Okay, so that's good. All right, the only thing is, okay, throughout the controllers, in each and every post action for create, edit, and delete, there is also, let me just copy this while I'm here, Control C. There's also a return link, redirect to action, name of index. So here I am going to do my Control H, replacing that with the one for return URL, right? And that's going to be in all open documents, okay? So these 4 controllers, every one of them, so there should be, oh, I can't remember how many when we think, at least 3 more, because I've done some of them. Yeah, so 3 more in each of all 4, that'd be 12 occurrences. Good. Okay, so now all of the links will use our return URL, which from our lookup controller, right, will have the proper tab information, okay? That's it. So that takes care of our controllers, right? So we're done with them, even the custom controllers, right? Uh, we have a bit of work to do in the views here though still, right? So I'm just gonna leave the ones that we need open here. So there's our specialty, okay, these ones. I'm gonna open all of them. Medical trial, condition. I'm just holding shift to select them all and pressing enter. Okay, so all these views are open, right? So I'm going to replace back to list, Control H, with our partial, our back to list partial. In all open documents. There we go. All right. So that takes care of that. Now, the heading section, yeah, we should probably do that as well, right? Our partial view for the head section. Unfortunately, that's hard to do with copy replace. You pretty much have to come in here and just make the change to each one, right? So we can get rid of the are sure you want to delete this. And remember as well, these H4s are no longer needed. They actually look wonky, so we'll take them out. Okay. So there is a bit of manual work to do here, but you know, if you don't want to watch, you can skip ahead in the video. Maybe I'll stop recording after I get the first set of them done. And then this H4 we don't need. Okay, so it's repetitive. You know, I'll just do this again for each of these, adding the view heading. And get rid of the H4. Okay, you see the idea. All right, took a few moments, but it's not a big deal. All right, so we have our partial for the back to list links. We have our partial for the headings. So that should take care of it for us now. So again, if I don't select anything, right, I get my warning that I have to choose something, right? Let's come here, edit, annual checkup. I don't know, I'll make sure I can edit it. And away we go. And let me do this test. This is an important one. I know this one for sure. Lots of people have got cancer, so, oh, I wanted to do a delete, right? So our link is correct. It goes back to our lookup, question mark, tab, condition tab. If I do delete, oh, see, I haven't added the try catches. Ah, there you go. That's something that you have to do before. But the point is that even after I did a delete and it did the try catch and came back with the error message, my link would still work. But I haven't done all the homework yet. You got to get your try catches around everything. But everything should be working once we get that in place.